Good morning, everyone. So we're back for another video today. We're going to be talking about mechanisms that drive evolution. So in the past videos that I've made before, we talked about the Hardy-Weinberg principle that had population frequencies stay the same generation after generation after generation if five particular factors were always kept the same. And to remind you again of those five factors were you needed to have a large population, you needed to have random mating, and then we needed to have three no's: no mutation, no migration, no natural selection. So obviously the opposite of those five things are going to be some of the factors that are going to be driving evolution, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the very first factor we're going to be discussing is going to be genetic drift. Genetic drift is a change in frequencies that can happen by chance in small populations. So when we do have a really large population, what ends up happening is genetic drift is not going to have an effect. Okay, so genetic drift is a change in, I'm just going to say frequencies, but that can be allele frequencies, genotype frequencies, or phenotype frequencies. So a change in frequencies in how often those things show up in a population. Okay. And I'm going to show you here just a little picture to show genetic drift. Okay, so generally you could have something like this, where you have a population. We talked about the beetles with the dark gray and the light gray body, and we see that we have that frequency of 0.3 versus 0.7 when it comes to the dark body versus the light body. But due to chance events, only the three beetles that you see right here leave offspring. So they are the only ones that mate and create offspring. Let's say that there is some sort of disorder or disease in the beetles that ends up killing all of these individuals, but not these individuals. Then they are the only ones that reproduce. They are the only ones that are going to be sending their genetic material forth to the next generation. And therefore the next generation of beetles all of a sudden starts to look like that. Okay, and these are things that can happen even more often right now with things like climate change. If you have a small population, you're going to see a lot of individuals go extinct, they die, and therefore they're not going to be passing out those genes to the next generation. Now, there are two specific kinds of genetic drift that you need to be aware of. So the two specific kinds are called the bottleneck effect . And the bottleneck effect is something that happens, for example, after a natural disaster. So the bottleneck effect, and I'll show you a picture of why it's called the bottleneck effect. This is when you're going to have a chance event, for example, a flood or a volcanic eruption, that is going to eliminate the majority of the population. And therefore, the next generation of individuals is just going to be made up of the survivor's DNA, the survivor's genes, the survivor's traits. Okay? So therefore, the next generation will have the traits of the survivors. Okay, and I'll show you why it's called the bottleneck effect. So here you can see sort of a picture that explains that. So you have an original population, and you can see that the original population is pretty even between the blue and the red beads. Those are the two traits, the blue and the red. And then because of a very tragic or a very chance event, only the individuals in the bottleneck survive. The rest, the ones that are in here, are all eliminated, and it's just the individuals that are in the bottleneck are going to be survived, just the ones that can get out. And so now that we see, these are the survivors. So then now the next generation, as you can see, because we had a disproportionate amount of red versus blue in our survivors, you can see that the next generation picks up those traits, and so it's going to be made majority of the red beads and very few of the blue beads. Okay, so that's the bottleneck effect. The next kind of genetic drift is similar to that, but this is called the founder effect. Now, the founder effect doesn't deal with a disaster or a chance event. It deals with migration. It deals with individuals leaving a population and starting a new one. So in the founder effect, we have a new population in a new area formed but just a few migrants. And these few migrants are called founders, like the founding fathers. Okay, so here I give you an example for the Irish. It was a very few individuals that left the shores of Normandy and decided to go to Ireland. And so here, what you're going to find is you're going to find that those individuals that went to Ireland had a high percentage of people with red hair. And so now the population of Ireland has a higher than usual number of people with red hair than compared to the rest of the world. Okay. So here I'm going to show you again a picture with that. And so you can see here the original population. We have some green, we have some orange, we have some purple, we have some red, quite the mix of individuals. But then these founders, these are the ones that are going to be leaving our original population and founding the new population in a new area. And as you can see, since they didn't bring any of the purple or the red with them, the new population is exclusively green and orange because those are the traits that they brought with them. Okay. So the next factor that we're going to be looking at, so that was how does having a large population prevent evolution from happening. So if you have a smaller population, things like the bottleneck effect, things like the founder effect can take place and cause evolution to happen in a population. Okay. The second factor that we're going to be talking about is non-random mating. Okay. And this is kind of an odd subject to bring up, but usually when I ask in class and I say, okay, we know that we need random mating in order for evolution not to occur, in order for a population to stay at equilibrium. And I usually ask, how many of you think that we mate randomly? And so the first thought that people go to is arranged marriage. And so they think, well, yeah, we mate randomly. We don't have arranged marriage. And so they put their hand up. And usually what I say is, okay, if we do mate randomly, then I'm going to go and choose somebody randomly in the school, and that's who you're going to be mating with for the rest of your life. And that's not what happens usually, right? So it's not a random process. We select our mates. We have, some people have a very short list of things. Some people have a very long list of things that they use to select our mates. Even in nature, you have mate selection. That's why you have peacocks with the beautiful large display of their tail. The males and the females are these brown, ugly birds. And the reason for that is because the females will choose which males they're going to mate with. And therefore, the males have developed these adaptations to make sure they get chosen. Because we do have non-random mating. We have mate selection, okay? So this is mating based on mate selection. Okay, we prefer to mate with specific genotypes versus others. So we do have a mate selection. And for that, again, I have a little picture for you guys. Right here, non-random mating. And as you can see, we don't need to know these terms. Assortative mating means that you tend to mate with organisms that look similar to you, whereas disassortative mating, we have preference for different genotypes and phenotypes. Now, when it comes to humans, it has actually been done. There have been studies that have been done about which way do we usually prefer to mate. And it has nothing to do with blondes prefer blondes or brunettes prefer brunettes. It has to do more with humans. The studies that they've done is we actually do disassortative mating. And they did an experiment where they had these men wear these t-shirts. So there was 10 men. They had to wear a white t-shirt, couldn't wear any deodorant, shampoo. They could shower as many times as they wanted, but they couldn't wear anything to mask their scent. And then they took these t-shirts after a week, they put them inside jars, and they had women smell the jars and determine which scent they found the most attractive and which one they didn't. And when they did the genetic analysis of that, what they found is that the majority of the time, actually, you know how they say dentists say 8 out of 10 dentists, recommend this particular toothpaste. This was 10 times out of 10. The women chose individuals or males that were the most genetically different from them. And so this kind of disassortative mating, what it does is it assures that our offspring will get all of the necessary traits that they need. If I have a set of traits that I'm bringing forth to the offspring and my mate has a different set, then they have a complementary set that they can help them survive in their environment better. And so that's that disassortative mating. And now the way that the t-shirt experiment worked, it worked based on pheromones, which are these hormones that we release through our scent and people find attractive versus not. Okay? So non-random mating, the fact that we select our mates makes sure that certain genotypes, certain phenotypes are preferred over others. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, there are just certain phenotypes that are not going to be as successful in mating. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, another thing that drives evolution is going to be gene flow. And gene flow is just a complicated name for migration. And so when I go from one place to another, I take my genetic makeup with me. I take my gene pool with me. So if I leave a particular population, I take away those traits out of the gene pool. If I come into a population, I bring those traits into a gene pool. Okay? So the migration as individuals move in and out of populations. They also move their traits, their alleles, their genes, whatever you want to say, in and out of those gene pools. Okay, and we have a picture for that too. So you can see here, I have a population of just light gray beetles. And as my dark gray beetle leaves this population and enters this population, it's going to bring its particular genotype with it. And when it comes to migration, we have to make the distinction that what happens with migration is it increases diversity within a population. Okay, so if you think of Canada, with all the migrants that we've had in our country, our population is very diverse, right? So we're increasing the diversity within the population. But what it does is it decreases diversity among population. So if I were to look at Americans and Canadians, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference just by looking at them, right? So what we're doing is we are decreasing, because migration is so free, we are decreasing the diversity between different populations, but we are increasing the diversity within a particular population, okay? Number 4 is natural selection. Okay, Okay, I'm leaving the big guns for last. Natural selection is the one that directly drives evolution. Okay, so this one is the only one actually that directly drives evolution. The other one's affected, but this is the driving force behind it is always natural selection. It doesn't matter if there's going to be traits available in a population or not. Remember, that's only one of the factors. I told you the factors that affect gene pools are what genes are available and the environment. So all of the things that we've discussed so far talk about what genes are available, but natural selection is the one that is going to figure out, are these genes going to stay or are they going to go? They're not necessarily going to stay, right? So natural selection, here we have one allele, one form of a gene, one particular trait is favored over another by making the organism either better adapted or less adapted to the environment. Okay, so by making the organism better adapted to its environment. And here again, we're going to look at a picture, and it's going to be this one. So natural selection, yes. I have a population of beetles, dark gray, light gray, but the light gray ones are not surviving in the environment, right? So in this particular environment that we're living in, the light gray maybe are easily spotted by predators and therefore they get eaten. And so what we get is the new generation that comes up is going to have a lot more of the dark gray individuals because they survived. And obviously there's still going to be some of the light gray, but again, these light grays are going to get eaten. So the next generation, what we might see is we might see even more of the dark gray and even less of the light gray. And then the thing is that with the environment changing, I could always change that around. I can flip that fate around. What if all of a sudden the environment changed and you had a very, very clean environment and all of a sudden the light gray individuals were ready to camouflage in that environment and the dark ones were to sort of pop out. Now the birds would start eating the dark ones and it would be the light ones that would survive. So the environment is going to be driving that evolution. It's going to be driving who survives and who doesn't. Okay. And then the last factor that we want to talk about is mutation. And the reason why we covered mutation last is because without mutation, none of this happens. Without mutation, you don't have variation. Without mutation, you don't have natural selection. So mutation is the one that I leave last. And we're not going to do a lot of details on it because we talked about it when we were in genetics, right? All of the different kinds. So this is the original source of variation in a population. And therefore, what starts evolution in the first place. If there wasn't mutation, we wouldn't have any of this, okay? And so again, and let's put a picture on here. This is a picture for mutation. And so as you can see, at some point during the development of this, during the evolution of this beetle species, we had just light gray individuals, and this is just an example. And it wasn't until a random mutation created that big A, or that dark gray allele, that we get all of a sudden an individual that looks like this. And then nature has to decide, okay, is this the favored genotype or is this the favored genotype? Is this individual better adapted at surviving in the environment, or is this the individual that is better adapted at surviving in the environment? Okay, so that's mutation. And those are the 5 factors. I'm also going to attach a little video from TED Ed called the 5 Fingers of Evolution. And if you have a chance, watch that as well. It's really good at giving you some mnemonic devices to remember these 5. Okay? Until the next time, I will see you guys tomorrow.